From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan kills 3 Americans and injures 35 in the continuing attacks by militia groups backed by Iran against U.S. bases and ships. President Biden vows to respond, but how and against whom? Plus, evidence emerges that employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees assisted Hamas in the October 7 massacre of 1,200 men and women in Israel. How should the U.S., which funds the agency, respond? Welcome, I'm Paul Gigot, here on Potomac Watch from the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, and I'm here with my colleagues Kate Batchelder-Odell and Kim Strassel. The terrible weekend news is that a drone attack eluded U.S. defenses and struck the base known as Tower 22 in Jordan, not far from the Syrian border. The drone strike seemed to have been launched by a militia group based in Syria. Tower 22 has about 350 U.S. service members, according to press reports. News reports on Monday say the drone made it through air defenses because of a mistake of identification. It was flying to the base at the same time a U.S. drone was returning, and defenses failed to identify the drone as hostile. But mistakes like that do happen, and the real issue is the continuing failure of U.S. deterrence to stop these attacks by militias on U.S. forces. Let's listen to President Biden on Sunday acknowledge the deaths and promise to respond.
I want to point out that we had a tough day last night in the Middle East. We lost 3 brave souls in an attack on one of our bases.
Yeah.
And I'd ask for public silence of all 3 of those souls. And we shall respond.
Sorry for the quality of that, but you got that essential point. We shall respond. So, Kate, tell us how many attacks so far have there been on U.S. forces since October 7th? And what about the U.S. casualty list?
Well, Paul, there's been about a little more than 150 attacks on U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq since October 17th. That's the current running tally. My rough estimate is that at least 86 Americans have been injured in those attacks. There was a large one in October that injured 45, including some troops with traumatic brain injuries. There was a significant one on Christmas Day that wounded 3 with a U.S. Army pilot left in a coma who's still recovering. There was 4 other traumatic brain injuries in January, and then yesterday's attack appears to have injured up to 34 now, in addition to 3 killed in action. So the injury toll is growing, and the president has vowed to respond. But if he had responded one of the first 150 times, and then every time thereafter, perhaps the U.S. wouldn't be in the difficult position it is now.
That is quite the toll that is adding up. Now, this is the first one in Jordan, I gather, Kate, right?
Yeah, that's right, near the Syrian border.
So it's an escalation on the part of the militias going into the sovereign territory of Jordan.
It absolutely is, though, again, all of these attacks have aimed to kill Americans. That's been the goal. The only reason they haven't is because the U.S. has excellent defenses in most parts of the world. The goal has been to kill Americans. Inevitably, that was going to happen if we just let these militias lob explosive drones at U.S. bases.
Yeah, when you're playing defense, you're basically trying to catch every single one of these drones or missiles, and sometimes one or more is going to get through. Talk first, Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Mitch McConnell, and others have responded to the attacks by calling for military responses against not just the militias, but also Iran and its assets. Let's listen to Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida, a Republican, on Monday.
Here's the message that Iran has gotten very clearly. They clearly didn't get the message to stop that Biden thought that they got. What the message that they've received is, yes, they're in a proxy war with us. They are unleashing their militias not just on Israel, but on us and on global shipping through the Houthis. And what Iran hears from that is, well, let's take it to the next level and see what we can get away with next time. And now we have 3 dead service members because of it that many of us have been warning. Eventually, one of these missiles, one of these drones are going to get through. And when you're trying to play defense constantly, rather than punching back in a meaningful way, this blood is on this administration's hands.
Kim, this has been the response from a number of Republicans, and certainly even the administration and Democrats have to concede that deterrence hasn't worked. It has failed. to stop these militias. The U.S. has responded, can't remember, I've lost track of the number of times, 3 or 4, maybe 1 or 2 more, with targeted narrow strikes against the militias. No doubt the president will do something more in this case now that there are dead Americans, but do you anticipate a large-scale response?
Well, one of the big questions that he has to make at the moment is he going to react to this the way he has in the past, as if it is a one-off and go after a militia here or there? Or is he going to send a real message of deterrence, which we should note may include attacking some Iranian facilities, whether commercial or military, within Iran, something that we have held off doing. If you look at what we've done so far, we did, as you know, Paul, we had a recent attack on a facility in Iraq that had been used by Kataib Hezbollah. We've had strikes against the Houthis. A couple of years ago, back when Donald Trump was still president, we engaged in an assassination attack on the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Qasem Soleimani, one of the generals. And so we've taken out people outside of Iran. But is it really working? Is it actually sending a message, or is it simply emboldening Iran? Do they think that they can continue throwing these proxies at us right and left? There'll be nothing more than a pinprick response here or there. And I think the real worry here is if Biden goes down that road again, this continues to escalate. That's the whole administration's point or claim, is that, well, we don't want to escalate. They're already escalating. And the question is, if you use deterrence, is that the better way? Strong deterrence, that's how you stop the escalation.
All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll have more on the deadly attacks on Americans in Jordan and by the Iranian proxy militias and the American response when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here with Kim Strassel and Kate Odell. Already, the administration is saying that there is no evidence that Iran ordered these strikes. And of course, that's the same message they managed to leak right after the Hamas attacks on October 7th, simply because you haven't found some intel that says you intercepted a phone call from some Iranian general to the militias to order the strike does not absolve Iran from responsibility here. Iran arms these militias. It helps train these militias. And clearly, in my view, I mean, all the intelligence that we have heard is that if they told these militias to stop, that they would.
Well, right. I mean, the White House statement included a line like, we're still gathering evidence. And I guess on the one hand, that's true. But on the other, we all know who's behind these attacks and who's been orchestrating them. And it's Iran. And I just add, U.S. Navy SEALs, 2 of them died in a mission trying to interdict weapons that were heading for Yemen to the Houthis. So we know who is orchestrating these attacks. We don't need the phone call, the mythical phone call saying send a drone while the U.S. is distracted to show that Iran is behind them. So I think that's pretty clear at this point.
Kate, why do you think the U.S. is talking like this by saying that, oh, well, there's no evidence of Iran? It's essentially an attempt to ease the political pressure on them to respond directly to Iran?
Yes, I think that we continue to live in this universe where the administration's governing fear is escalation with Iran. And they keep saying that they want to avoid regional wider war with Iran. And never mind that we're already fighting a regional war in the Middle East. It's not obvious that we're winning it, but we are fighting it on Iran's terms, fighting back to what they having to deal with whatever they do, instead of simply shutting down further escalations from them by making Tehran pay a price. And I think to Kim's point about what the administration does, at this point, I don't think they have a choice but to hold Iranian targets at risk, because the Iranians have gotten a long impression now that we won't fire back. And so it'll take a pretty significant response at this hour to disabuse them of that impression.
All right. So what Iranian targets would you volunteer, Kate? And I ask that given that we know that the U.S. has an extensive target list, right? That we know that they know where the Iranian manufacturing facilities are for their drones, for example, the drones that are going to Russia to help against Ukraine. We know where their nuclear facilities are. We know where their oil fields are. We know there's a ship, a spy ship in the Red Sea. We know where their naval assets are. Are you saying that those assets have to be considered, and some of them may have to be struck?
Yeah, we're not lacking targets. We're lacking the political will to strike. And I think one target that seems to make a lot of sense would be the Iranian spy ship that has been prowling around the Red Sea, giving the Houthis real-time intelligence information to attack commercial shipping. And also U.S. warships. The Houthis are launching missiles at U.S. warships, and we're having to defend ourselves in these destroyers. So I think that is a salient target because it also shows that what's going on in the Red Sea is connected to these U.S. attacks in Iraq and Syria. And the Biden administration has been at pains to make this strange argument that they're disconnected, but they're clearly not. It's clearly Iran governing all of these different theaters in this regional war.
Kim, the administration, it's an election year, and the administration is clearly reluctant to have another front of conflict in the world. There's already the war against Hamas in Gaza, which is causing political backlash in the United States, and particularly in parts of the Democratic Party because of casualties. There's also the war in Ukraine, where Russia is on the offensive now, and there's a real controversy in Congress over whether to give more military aid to Ukraine. And all of that contributes to the sense that the world is spinning out of control, that there's growing disorder. And I think the administration is deeply concerned, understandably so, that this will create the impression among voters that President Biden is weak as a leader, and playing into the hands of the Republican opponent, whoever that is. I guess the dilemma for the administration is we're getting, as you both have said, these attacks anyway. And the question is, if you don't respond in force, you're going to probably get more of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And it's just going to be a slow drip of bad news for the president. And I would note that also puts some of his bigger ambitions at risk. Not only do you get a continued bout of headlines about troops being injured, attacked, killed, if you are a weak Joe Biden, you are not doing anything to help your cause in Congress for the argument that you want to stand tall as an international leader. You want to send more money to Ukraine. You just mentioned that deal. None of this, I mean, you just heard the criticism from Republican senators. That is not shoring up Biden's allies in Congress who want to help him on the Ukraine front. And so I appreciate the dilemma and the hometown politics, but by doing nothing, he is continuing to escalate national security to a top voter election concern, and one that he doesn't look like he's the strong guy in a one-on-one against a Republican candidate.
Kate, a couple of other possible consequences here. One is this is going to increase pressure inside Congress and in parts of the United States public to withdraw troops from the Middle East. If we can't protect them, the argument will be, then it's irresponsible to keep those folks at risk, even if we know men and women who join the military do so knowing the risks, but they didn't volunteer to be target practice for militias. The other point, and you've been following this for a long time, is the impact on recruiting into the military.
Right. I mean, I think on the first point, you do have a corrosion of the public's perception of our ability to defend ourselves in the Middle East. And the public will start dimly wondering, what are we doing over there? Are our troops equipped to succeed at their mission? I think it would have been a mistake for Biden to pull out U.S. troops from Syria and Iraq, especially as we try to use those bases to work against ISIS. But at least it would have been intellectually honest to say, we're going to bring them back instead of leave them there and pretend like he's fulfilling his duty to protect them when he's not. On the second point, I do really worry that in this recruiting environment where almost all the services are missing their numbers for multiple years in a row, you'll have Americans watch this and wonder why they should sign up if they're going to get sent to the Middle East to play drone catchers. I mean, we're also relying on former veterans, on teachers, on parents to look at young men and women with a lot of potential and other opportunities and say, you should put those off and go serve the country in uniform. And I think there's real reason to worry that the status quo in the Middle East is making Americans think, well, this is just not an institution worth signing up for, not a cause worth putting my life on the line for. I think American service members are willing to put their life on the line when they know the mission and the purpose and they know why. But clearly, we don't have that theory of the case from President Biden. So I do think that will ripple down into a real effect on people's willingness to sign up to serve in a force that relies on volunteers.
I was talking over the weekend with a former Army general who said that the recruiting crisis in the armed services is his single biggest worry about U.S. security. He said the Army's down 40,000 below its recruiting target. And while the Marines are making it, they're getting close to their target level as well and putting even Marine recruitment at risk. And that's been the best of the armed services so far in meeting their targets. So it's a real problem.